Two-dimensional universe. The break of a line is the death of a line at the break point and at the same time the birth of a plane. This is how one-dimensionality passes into two-dimensionality. The break of the line of life of the human race occurs at the moment when man realizes his individual life, its separateness from the life of the race. The realization of individual life is reflected in the so-called heroic myths widespread among different peoples. These myths, in turn, can be conditionally subdivided into twin myths, myths of incest, myths of feats. Gemini myths, like many others, are an example of reinterpretation of ancient null-dimensional myths in terms of higher dimensionality. Myths that were later called twin myths first appeared as solar cyclic myths of the alternation of day and night, such as the myth of the solar twin brothers Ashvins in Indian mythology. The main plot of twin myths is the death of one of the twin brothers in front of the other, and the surviving twin's realization of his own mortality and his own individual life. In the Sumerian myth of Gilgamesh, his brother Enkidu dies. Gilgamesh witnesses, as it were, his own death. Embracing concepts such as time and death, Gilgamesh goes in search of the flower of immortality, beginning an endless series of feats of two-dimensional heroes. Gilgamesh finds the flower of immortality in his ancestor, Utnapishtim. But the latter possesses not individual but generic, one-dimensional immortality. It is logical that Gilgamesh eventually loses this flower of ancestral immortality and is forced by heroic deeds to gain individual immortality. The highest ethical value in the two-dimensional mythological space is the individual life of a man, a hero, his personal immortality. In the new ethics, instead of the generic we, the individual I of the hero, who by his feats wins his personal immortality, comes to the fore. What are the feats? It does not matter. Whether to burn a temple, whether to skin a defeated enemy. A true hero is allowed to do anything, any violation of previous tribal taboos. He is limited in one thing only: he is mortal. A hero needs at least a loud fame as an equivalent of immortality. As a result of his feats, the hero at the will of the gods can become an immortal demigod. Instead of generic totemic primordial gods, the hero now has individual gods as well. These are divine patrons who lead the hero through the rock, towards fate, towards glory and immortality. The very notion of individual destiny, hitherto unknown, emerges. Such is the ethics of Homeric heroes. Among them, power is the law. From the heroes are required always and in everything to be the first, discredited the one who allowed himself to win, not the winner. It is shameful to listen to the reviled, not to revile someone oneself, etc. Lusef also speaks about this ethics. The aesthetics of tumultuous self-assertion of the heroes of antiquity comes to narcissism and some wild animal aesthetics. Actually, the story of Gilgamesh begins with the fact that he opposes himself to the life of the clan. Being the ruler of the city of Uruk, he brutally rules and rampages, violating all tribal prohibitions. The inhabitants of the city wave to the gods. They create his brother Enkidu, who then dies. Gilgamesh realizes his mortality, and so on. The chain of events leads Gilgamesh from the external separation from the clan to the internal separation from the clan, to the explosion of mythological consciousness and the transition to the next dimension, to two-dimensionality. Let us recall that the heroic epics of Heracles and Odysseus also began with the violation of kin taboos. Both of them were guilty of the death of their relatives. Incidentally, Odysseus' wife Penelope also sacrilegiously violated ancestral taboos. Odysseus was considered already dead, and she, from the point of view of tribal consciousness, continued to be one of the women of the family, therefore she was obliged to marry one of Odysseus' relatives. In world folklore, twin myths can be found in different variations: biblical Cain and Abel, Armenian Ervind and Evraz, Sanassar and Bagdasar, Avestan Ormuzd and Ahriman. Many of the twin myths, born in the null-dimensional period as cyclic calendar myths, received a later two-dimensional interpretation, where the death of one of the brothers and the realization of their individual mortality by the survivor were present. A different sex variant of the twin story is the incest story. The heroes of this story are distinguished from their clan by the fact that they break another clan taboo, not to marry members of their totem. Outcasts of the clan, in the heroic narrative they assert new ethical values, in particular love between a man and a woman, a feeling that unites the lovers forever, i.e., thus joining them to personal immortality. The linear flow of time, stretched earlier up to the infinite period of life of the human race, in the two-dimensional universe is compressed to a short segment of individual life, by the end of which it is necessary to have time to acquire personal immortality. Besides, in the two-dimensional universe there is a much larger, multiplied space, a plane, per unit of time. The plane unfolds both as an external space, not limited already by traditional places of genus dwelling, and as an internal space, with increased degrees of freedom of individual thought and wider choice of variants of actions. If in the ancestral life of a human being the phenomenon of thinking as an isolated individual has not yet practically existed, either life within the clan or non-existence, then in two-dimensionality individual thought, having appeared, begins to pulsate on the principles of two-dimensional logic. Either or, the third is not given. He who is not with us is against us. Either a trembling creature or I have the right. On the basis of this two-dimensional logic, ancient Greek tragedy emerges, the key of which is the tragic conflict, i.e. an irresolvable contradiction between two polar opposites. Oedipus the king unknowingly commits the gravest of generic crimes, patricide and incest with his mother. After experiencing catharsis and realizing this fact, he is left to live as a blinded but enlightened sage of another dimension. After entering the next dimension and acquiring new ethical values, the mythological hero always becomes on the other side of good and evil of the previous dimension. In the two-dimensional universe the course of events is much faster than in the one-dimensional one. Mastering the unfolding territorial expanses of two-dimensionality requires extremely active, agile, savvy individuals, literally heroes, numerous Argonauts, Odysseans, Sinbad sailors and other mythological travelers and adventurers. The leader of the Argonauts, Peleus, also embarked on a long voyage, largely because he had carelessly killed his nephew, for which, according to the oracles, he was condemned by the gods to perform feats or face death at the hands of a member of his own kind. In the two-dimensional consciousness traveling through the vastness, a well-known planar picture of the world is finally formed, with three whales in the ocean, on which the flat saucer of the earth is supported. In the social order, two-dimensional consciousness formed republics of military democracy. The classic example is ancient Sparta. Voluntary association on territorial and ethnic grounds of field commanders of those years and people subordinated to them. Democracy consisted in the fact that anyone with enough strength and desire could become a field commander. For example, according to the early codes of Roman law, that field commander, aka free citizen, had the right to enslave, take the life of a slave at his discretion, had the property right of the first to seize the booty, and so on. The plots of travels and adventures of two-dimensional heroes are further reinterpreted from the position of three-dimensionality, which leads to the emergence of the genre of the knave and adventurous novel and the short story in literature. Next time we will consider the three-dimensional mythological universe.